Today we're talking about the pitfalls and opportunities from the world of building science. We live in exciting time. We live in the time of electrification. We have the goals set for 2030 to increase the use of renewables by 80%, as well as by 2030 having every third car being sold in the US being electric. And then the goal is also to increase four times the sales of heat pump for heating and cooling in homes. So we have some ambitious goals in our time of electrification. And at the same time, we have some priorities that are competing with each other. We see different sectors converging to the same energy vector, that is electricity, as well as we see competition in the world of construction where embodied carbon and operational carbon seems to have conflicting priorities in trying to minimize the impact of buildings. And lastly, are buildings actually getting better with this technology? So, one of my favorite quotations from Ren Koolhaas, enacted from Holland, is he used to call people voluntary prisoners of architecture. And that's because we spend 90% of our time inside buildings. And the buildings we live in naturally have a very strong impact on our health and well being. That being said, this is something that we ask builders that take our training all the time. How long do you think a family stays in a house that they just moved into before they move out again? Think about that. Most builders that come and take our training think 3 years, 5 years, some think it's 7 years. And the reality is that in average, that family is going to stay in that house for 13 years before they move out again. This is the number of years that a family stays in a house today. And it has been 13 years for the past 10 years. So this is part of the building science. If you're making recommendations to your client based on your knowledge should also have realistic expectation of how long they're going to be in that house before they move out again. And that number is 13 years. Now, our cozy prisons are all but cozy. These are the buildings we live in. This is an example of a brewery in Colorado. That is my beer glass. And we were having an emu meeting at that time, and I could only stay for a very short period of time because that place was freezing. They had some very cool garage doors enclosing that brewery space, but it was 39 degrees on the interior surface of the glass. So it was extremely uncomfortable. And they literally lost business because I love beer and I would have had a second beer at least. But that day it was so cold that I had to go. So they lost business because the clientele was uncomfortable. Similarly, this is a picture that we show frequently in our presentations. This is a case of a building that is moldy, and it has become moldy after a partial retrofit where they addressed windows, they did not address thermal bridging, they did not address ventilation. So the building is now more energy efficient, but it is extremely moldy, so it is a lot less healthy. And this should not be a competition. Buildings should become healthier as they are becoming more energy efficient. That is one of the goals that we should have in any approach that we have towards buildings. This is an example of ice forming inside the window in a place I was staying at in the Denver metro area. And I posted that on the internet because, oh, look at this. I'm talking about building science and I have glass forming inside of my window. And this window, just like the building I was living in at the time, was less than 10 years old. And when I posted this picture with the ice on the internet, on LinkedIn, I had dozens of fenestration professionals, so people that either design or install or manufacture windows for a living, tell me that to quit bitching about it because for them it was normal to have ice forming inside of the window. I did not have a humidifier in that room. It was just a regular day. It was a cold day, but didn't have any extreme weather events outside, nor did I have a humidifier. So just to give you an idea how accepted it is in the US, that windows are going to have condensation. Windows are going to have inside ice forming inside of them. This is normal for professionals designing, manufacturing, and building windows. Keep that in mind. And this is a graph of my struggle in the same place, same apartment with the ice, in trying to control indoor air quality, not having a fresh air ventilation system. That was an apartment building that had a regular forced air furnace system that did not have fresh air from the outside. And I either had uh, a warm temperature without fresh air ventilation, or I had to open my windows so the room would get cold, but then I would get rid of the CO2, so I had better air quality. So it was a struggle that at the time I could not fix because the building was not putting me in a position to manage the indoor air quality that I had at home. And lastly, the same building, I once shot the laser level, and I find that wall on the left-hand side to be off plumb by 3/4 of an inch. So my expectations suddenly dropped, and I moved out. So that is a real-life experience of what it is to live in mainstream construction buildings today. Now we have on the market we have basically two extremes. One is the worst building type that you can legally build. And that is a building built to the code minimum. That is represented here with the 2021 IECC building code minimum. And then on the other end of the spectrum at the top, we have passive house. Passive house buildings need about 80% less heating and cooling compared to regular construction. And those are the two extremes that we typically see in the market between code minimum and passive house. Now, in between, we see a lot of better than code building, or my building is 20% better, or it's high performance. These are all definitions that oftentimes don't have a real justification because they don't actually abide by a set standard, or they don't actually have ways to measure that 20% better. Is just a number that an architect or a builder may pull out of the rear end to have a better grip on the clientele. We can have a super insulated building. We can have super tight, zero utility house, or questionable. It's passive solar. That is some very old concept. Or it's basically passive, but haven't done the modeling. So you have not done your homework and you don't know, really. And these we call the floaters because they float in between code minimum and passive house. And there's some risks associated with that. To start with, the expectations are undefined. What does success look like in a conversation with your clientele if you're not defining your goals clearly? That is, if you don't define your goals clearly, that is very, very risky in any conversation. Then you have the risk of overpromise and under-deliver, and that leads to disappointment and frustration. It can be overkill. You can end up overpaying for amount of insulation, the type of window package that you order, or it can be under-delivered, especially in the indoor quality, but even the construction quality. Miss moisture management, so thermal bridging, the issue with mold that we saw in the previous slide, that's an issue with moisture. And then lack of structure and guidance. What are you actually trying to do with this project? So these are all issues that we see over and over with projects that don't commit to full passive house, but they want to try to do better than code. It's very gray and fuzzy and unclear what these projects are trying to do. Think of it as this is you're going to the doctor because your arm hurts and you're trying to get an answer from the doctor that is visiting you, and the doctor says it's broken, or it's basically broken, or it's better than broken. So it sounds ridiculous, but that is what construction is at right now. We want to have that diagnosis, um, to have a clear understanding of what's going on. And better than broken buildings are risky. Um, in a newly built home, what percentage of the total heat loss do you expect to see from exterior walls? Or for windows, what percentage? Do you expect the windows to be 50%, the windows to be 10%? This is windows without considering the air leakage, for example. What about air leaks for the whole house? That zero point 0.6 air changes per hour that is for passive house, or 3 air changes per hour that is for code, or 1.1 air changes per hour that is for fuse projects. Is that 50% of the total heat losses? Is that 20%? Is that 15? Do you know? What about losses to the ground? So this is part of the study that we published last year about different building standards across the US. And looking at 50 different projects, we found that in average, about over a third of the total heat losses in a home, in a new home, built to the 2021 Energy Code, which is the most recent one, even if right now it's 2024. More than a third of the total heat losses happen through windows and exterior doors, not including air leaks. Air leaks in this pie chart are summarized all together in the darker blue wedge. The very large green wedge, which is the heat losses through windows and exterior doors, happen through the glass and through the frame. So over a third of the total heat losses of a building, in average, for a new built home with new built windows, happen through exterior windows and doors. Then second one, about a fifth of it, like 22%, is through exterior walls. Then number three is heat losses through the ground to the outside air, meaning that if you have a house on a slab, those are losses through the slab, through the ground, through to the exterior air. Regardless of if the ground is at a constant temperature, so to speak, it is a solid body that insulates about as much as concrete. So think about your house as sitting on a block of concrete, which does not insulate. So these are losses through that block of concrete that is Mother Earth to the exterior air. That is 13% in average. It can be your basement through your basement floor, even if it is 10 feet deep. It's going to be through your basement walls, assuming it's a conditioned basement, through the concrete block or through the dirt to the outside air. And only at number 4 in this list is actual air leaks, including air leaks to the windows and doors. This is the blue wedge here showing 11% of the total heat losses is all of the air leaks of the house. These are buildings built to the 2021 Energy Code, which has a maximum air leakage of 3 ACH50 air changes per hour at 50 Pascal. What happens if we build those buildings to the passive house standard? The breakdown would actually be very similar. You see, we have the same pie chart on the right-hand side with PHI passive house built 50 projects. So the same projects as before, but instead of complying with the energy code, we're now complying with the passive house standard. And yet again, even if we're switching to high performance triple pane, very good tight windows, those still count for over a third of the total heat losses. Second is still the exterior walls. Even if we have continuous insulation, even if we have double walls, typically the exterior walls count for a lot of the square footage of the exterior skin of the building. And so that is why exterior walls count so much. Keep in mind that this report is available for download, as well as these are 50 actual projects that have their own design, some of them are ranch style, some of them have a basement, some of them have 2 stories, some of them have 3 stories, each with their own form factor and orientation. So these are not buildings that are intentionally designed to meet passive house. These are just 50 projects that we modeled over the course of the year. Now, if we bring them to passive house, windows and exterior doors still count as the main source of heat losses. Exterior walls still count as the second one. Third is still heat losses through the ground to the outside. And then air leaks drop to number 5 in this scenario, with number 4 being, for passive house, being the ceiling. Now, what is interesting is that this breakdown, when you compare apples to apples, passive house has a lot less heat losses in total, but the breakdown between windows versus walls versus air leaks is very similar to a code built building. Now, informed decisions matter because every project has a limited budget, and the data that you get from an energy analysis helps you make decisions and make them based on your goals, whichever goals you may have, and whether or not you want to meet a certain green builder certification. It's just a way to have a diagnosis, just like you go to the doctor and they tell you that your arm is broken. It's better than that than they tell you, oh, it's basically broken, but you don't actually know. So the moment you decide to spend more money, there's plenty of people that are willing to help you spend money, but you don't necessarily meet your goal that you have set for your project. So in this scenario, we want to help you quantify how much A is better than B, and whether you do need B or if you're okay with C, whichever those uh, A, B, and C may be. Maybe it's a higher performing window package, maybe it's more insulation in your building overall, maybe it is a heat pump. But if you don't know, if you don't have the data, then how can you make decisions? You just don't know. What we promise and what we deliver. This is a study made in the UK where they looked at the performance, at the actual performance of 25 built projects. And the pinkish columns show the expected or promised energy performance, so how much energy that building was supposed to consume for the overall operation. And then the maroon darker red shows the what the actual additional consumption was in on top of the expectation, meaning that the buildings with a lot of darker red maroon columns were very were consuming a lot more energy than it was anticipated, and that is a sign of a performance gap. Performance gap is the gap between what you promise and what you actually deliver, and that is very common for code built buildings and even the floaters, projects that are built in between code minimum and passive house. If you don't have a very clear expectation, if you just say, "Oh, my building is super tight," my building is 20% better than code. You just don't know. And your building is doomed to be consuming more energy than what you expected and more energy than your client actually expects. Now, in this scenario, in the UK, they found that the buildings that were not only consuming the least energy, but also were being more predictable in how much energy they would actually consume were passive house projects. So passive house in this case not only helps you um, deliver a very high performance building to your clients, it's also a way to have a very dependable promise that you can deliver on to your client. This is the map showing the 50 projects that we analyzed and studied in the report I mentioned. And the study that we found was that once you start considering adding electric cars to the mix, you can have either a code built house or you can have a passive house and charge two electric vehicles for the same amount of energy that it takes to operate a code built building without charging any cars. So that is a pretty uh, informative piece of information, because if we look 5-10 years down the line what is coming, the buildings that we are building today are still going to be there, most of them, and we are going to be in an economy where electric vehicles are going to be common and commonly charged at home, and energy is not going to be cheaper. So building your building to the passive house level, or offering passive house to your clients, is a way to future proof those projects and those buildings for an economy where electric vehicles are going to be much more common and charged at home. So, getting to this, we are getting to the passive house story of Enrico and Enrique. This is something that all of you have been waiting so long to have a new episode of. We have Enrico that has an accent. It is a total square for those, and is contracted to build a passive house. And then on the other hand, we have Enrique, also has an accent, Googles a lot, and is contracted to build a passive house like home. And we're going to see the differences here. So they have identical projects. This is my house up in the mountains, and I moved it to Boulder, Colorado for this experiment. But they basically have the same set of blueprints. They're just contracted to build. One is Enrico is contracted to build it to the actual passive house standard, and Enrique is just contracted to build passive house like, but without actual follow up on that. And I moved the project to Boulder, Colorado, because this is a presentation I gave for the Natural Building Alliance conference in Boulder. Plus, Boulder is climate zone 5. It's more middle of the road climate compared to the actual location of this project that is at 8,800 feet of elevation in the mountains of Colorado. So Enrico has a performance-based standard using the low energy building code, whereas Enrique uses the fuse prescriptive. In the study I mentioned, we compared these two standards pretty closely because we wanted to investigate the advantages of using a prescriptive approach versus the advantages of using a performance-based approach. So I'm going to have a slide towards the end where I can show a QR code where you can download the actual report and look at the results. So for the floor, we started off with 7 inches of EPS for Enrique, whereas the Enrico had 6 inches. This is because Enrico was using the PHI low energy building, which is a performance-based approach. So he was able to shave off some insulation there and save some money, as well as saving some embodied carbon, for example. For the exterior walls, Enrique used 6 inches of mineral wool, exterior insulation, and an R20 dense pack cellulose in the 2x6 stud cavity framing. Whereas Enrico on the left-hand side was still using the performance-based approach, so was able to shave off an inch of mineral wool, so he was getting to the same energy performance, but using a little bit less insulation. Then for the roof, Enrico was following the fuse prescriptive checklist using 24 inches of fiberglass loose fill, whereas Enrico was doing a few inches less because through the energy analysis that he was using with the performance approach, he was able to navigate the diminishing returns of using so much insulation. And so he decided to choose 21 inches instead of 24, which is what Enrique did. Enrique was using just the checklist, so didn't have a chance to see how much the diminishing returns were impacting his projects. Then looking at windows and doors, Enrique used a cigarette frame with skinny triple pane. So the skinny triple pane is a glass that is a triple pane that measures 1 inch from the exterior face of the glass to the interior face of the glass, and low gains glass because he was concerned about overheating in the summertime. Plus, without the energy model, you don't actually have a way to see how much low or high gains glass actually impacts your buildings. And Boulder, Colorado is in a heating dominated climate, but Enrique had no idea to verify how much passive solar gains actually matter because he didn't have an energy analysis. He was just following the fuse prescriptive checklist. Enrico, on the other hand, was using beefy triple pane, so a triple pane glass that measures almost twice as much in thickness of the glass. This is not the glass pane itself, it's the pockets inside that are thicker, because that is a way to optimize the performance of the argon gas fill. And um, with the support of the energy analysis, Enrico was able to optimize the passive solar gains for his building for his climate. So that is why we see a solar heat gain coefficient of 0.52, which means that that glass lets about 50% of the energy from the sun through the glass to the inside, whereas the low gains glass from Enrique on the right hand side only lets in about 0.24, so about 24% of that total energy. This is a game changer in the way to assess the energy performance, and you need the energy analysis or the energy model to actually to be able to see how your building captures that sun and how that performs in wintertime versus summertime. Then looking at the fresh air ventilation system with heat recovery, ERV and HRV, um, Enrico was using a passive house certified 87% heat recovery centralized unit, as opposed to Enrique was using a decentralized um, heat recovery ventilation room by room with a label data, a label recovery rate of 89%. We're going to see what that looks like in a sec. The air barrier strategy, both of them wanted to get below zero point 0.6. Enrico used the taped vapor barrier polyethylene membrane under the slab as the air barrier at the slab, connected that to the sheeting at the walls, and then the smart vapor retarder on the underside of the ceiling at the roof. Whereas Enrique used drywall for the air barrier both at the wall and at the ceiling, as well as used aero barrier, which is a nebulized caulking agent, to air seal to down to zero point 0.6 to get to that airtightness level. So different air barrier strategy. We're gonna see a little bit of how that performs. It's time to build. Did the blower door test. Got to 0.6. Got to 0.6. Yay! We hit the finish line. The performance value seems the same. This is the Enrico on the left-hand side was pursuing the PHI low energy building certification with the International Passive House Institute, whereas the Enrique on the right-hand side was using the Fuse prescriptive approach. If you want to look at more comparison between these two standards, please download the report. There's going to be a QR code at the end of this presentation to get that download page. So this is at face value, both projects meet the same operational performance. We get to the client expectation, we have indoor air quality, we have thermal comfort, moisture is under control, energy efficiency feels good, happy, happy, joy, joy, puppies and kittens. Yay, it's good when projects end up well like that. The bill, by face label, they were supposed to have similar performance. Enrico spent about $3,500 in energy modeling fees, which led him to using an R25 at the slab, R40 at the walls, and R67 at the ceiling. Enrique, on the other hand, used a prescriptive approach, meaning $0 for the energy modeling. Used the Fuse prescriptive checklist with the R30 at the slab, R45 at the walls, and R76 at the ceiling. That led Enrique to needing, because of this checklist, not needing, using about 600 cubic feet extra insulation, leading to about $7,000 more cost of the insulation. So if you look at just the cost of the insulation that Enrique had, is about twice as much of the energy analysis that Enrico had on the left-hand side to get to the same energy performance. So this is where it's important to have a clear understanding about what you're trying to do. If the energy analysis only looks like an expense, maybe you're not considering all the pieces that are involved. Because if you're looking at just a prescriptive checklist, you end up typically spending a lot more money in insulation to get to the same energy performance, and you don't actually know whether or not you are going to get to that energy performance because you don't actually have an energy analysis or an energy model to do that guidance for you. So the looking at the energy analysis basically pays for itself once you factor these factors in. And the additional energy performance Enrico was able to exploit was the actual optimization for how the building performs on that site in the climate. Enrico was able to optimize the coating on the glass so that it would let in the right amount of energy during the winter time for that climate without causing overheating in the summertime. And without the energy model, you don't get to do that. So that is something that if you actually want to get to a higher energy performance level, you need to accept that you're going to have an energy analysis done for your project. The source efficiency, this is what we covered just now. This is covered in depth in the report. Again, at the end of this report, there's going to be a QR code for that report download. Now, that was just the upfront cost. The energy performance, in theory, on paper, is the same. However, over time, or actually day one, once the occupants move in, Enrique finds out that their actual energy consumption is much higher than what he was anticipating, about 2/3 higher. Why is that? This is the performance gap that we covered earlier in this presentation, looking at the study from the UK. So, and also Enrique starts looking at Enrique is my evil twin. People call me Enrique all the time. You know what? You're gonna get the evil twin if you call me Enrique. So Enrique also gets condensation inside of his windows, and clients are clearly not happy, as well as it's very uncomfortable because there is some issues with interior temperatures and windows. Why is that? The C word, condensation. How much moisture does a family of four generates in a house over a typical day? Do you know? It's about 2.5 gallons per day. So it's a lot of moisture that we generate by breathing, taking showers, cooking. If we have pets, we generate a lot of moisture. And then moisture goes somewhere. Enrique used Googles a lot, so used a detail that found on the internet, which had a metal sill pan under the sills of all of his doors and windows, which is a big thermal bridge. If you look at the isotherms, you have a big thermal bridge under the window through that metal, which opens the ground for condensation. This is just science. If you look at details on Instagram, and if you think this metal sill pen is a good detail, try to ask if they have ever done a thermal bridge analysis of the detail to assess the risk for condensation. Because condensation happens, condensation takes no prisoners. Enrico, on the other hand, had a similar flashing detail but using tape flashing, so no metal flashing under the windowsill. He had some flashing details exterior to the window to protect the insulation, to protect the tape flashing, but no metal was coming in under the window, meaning that we get no condensation. This is just science. This is just what we know about moisture management. So this is where Enrique was getting condensation. For thermal comfort, in theory, both of them use triple pane windows. So what happened? What happened is that Enrico used beefy triple pane. We're going to see what that means in a second. Argon-filled, so there's argon gas inside the glass unit that provides better insulation than just air. There's some low E coating, and then it's an INI install, meaning that the window Enrico installs is in the middle of the wall, which is lined up with the center of the insulation of that wall. As opposed to Enrique, on the right-hand side, used a skinny triple pane. We're going to see what that means in a second. His glass units, the glass units that Enrique chose, are filled with air because Enrique was afraid of the argon gas escaping, meaning that insulative property would be gone. But that insulates less. And then it's a more traditional Audi install all the way to the outside. That has consequences as far as thermal comfort because if you look at on the left hand side, the window of Enrico is lined up on the center of the isotherms. The isotherms are the black lines that run along the walls, along the rainbow, so to speak, and they represent lines of the same temperature. And isotherms want to go straight and easy, just like an old guy walking to the post office. And if you center your window in the middle of the wall, these isotherms are going to have an easy time going straight, slowly, and they're going to be happy, meaning that there's going to be less thermal bridging and less heat losses. Whereas on the right hand side, you see Enrique's install with the isotherm view, and the window installed all the way to the outside, to the left hand side of his wall assembly, meaning that his wall isotherms have to walk all the way to the left to get into the window, into the glass unit, and then back all the way to the right to get back into the wall insulation. And the more left and right and left and right that your isotherms have to do, the least happy they are, and the more issues you're going to have with thermal bridging, and the more performance you're going to lose along the way. This is part of what happened in this case with Enrique's window and Enrique's discomfort issue. So this is part of the passive house standard. In order to have thermal comfort, the delta between your average window surface area and your dome average has to be less than 7.6 degrees. And if you have less than 7.6 degrees, then you have an even temperature level, and so you feel comfortable. And if you don't, if your delta is greater, as in the case of Enrique's window here on the right hand side, where it's almost 21 degrees delta, almost 3 times as much the delta maximum, then you're going to be uncomfortable because your body senses that one side of the room is a lot colder than the rest of the room. That is the science of thermal comfort. This is a study from the report. It shows the average of those temperatures. I don't want to spend too much time on this today, but it shows very sadly that even the newest energy code, the 2024 energy code, at the time this report was done was just a draft. That draft did not account thermal comfort at all. So that in 2027, when the 2024 energy code is going to be the standard, buildings are going to still be uncomfortable because thermal comfort is not the reason windows are specified in code minimum buildings. So just one more reason why you should not stick to a code minimum build for your project. Then looking at beefy and skinny triple pane glass, the left-hand side shows a section drawing of the window that Enrico chose at the top, as opposed to Enrique's window at the bottom. And you see each drawing show the width of the glass unit, and by our own labeling, this is beefy and skinny, something that EMU came up with, just to give you an idea about how important the thickness of the glass unit is. The beefy glass that Enrico uses measures 1.8 inches, almost 2 inches, from the exterior face of the exterior pane to the interior face of the interior pane. And it's not the thicknesses of the panes of glass themselves that matter. Those are typically about 1/8 of an inch each. It's the thickness of the pocket that matters because that pocket can be optimized for the type of airfill or gas fill that you have to maximize the insulation that you get. And that is very important. That is very, very important. And sometimes, oftentimes, mainstream manufacturer gives you the option of going triple pane glass. You say, oh, I'm having a good window. It's triple pane. And actually, the number of panes matter little if your overall unit is only 1 inch thick or less, which is what Enrique had at the bottom. So Enrique's window is mounted on a regular outswing frame. Mainstream frames don't allow for very deep glass units because of the way they're built. So they sell you a skinny triple pane. You pay the premium for the triple pane, but you do not get the performance because it's skinny. So you don't get much R value, but you do pay the premium. This is something that is very important because you may buy the perception of having bought a better product because it's triple pane, but you're actually getting oversold something that under delivers, skinny triple pane. This is extra data. We're going to publish some of that later in life, but to give you an idea of the R value that you get from a skinny triple pane, you look at the column chart here on the right hand side. Center of glass R value of an air-filled skinny triple pane glass is about an R4 or R5, as opposed to a beefy triple pane glass filled with argon. You almost get twice as much the R value, about 9.8 to 10. So there's a very significant difference in the R value that you get from a beefy triple pane. Keep in mind that whichever energy performance standard you're following, code minimum or passive house, windows and exterior doors count for over a third of those heat losses. So you have windows because you want to have daylight or want to see outside. So you have glass. So having good quality glass is kind of key to getting to your goals. And it's also very expensive. So you want to be careful not to buy triple pane and then you get half the R value just because it's a skinny triple pane. This is very important just to get the value that you're trying to pay for. Now, this big difference in R value is partially due to the skinniness or beefiness, very building science language here, of the glass, and also partially of the fill of the glass unit with argon or air. We're going to see that in just a sec. Talking about heat recovery, Enrique had chosen a decentralized through the wall heat recovery unit. They have a certification according to a German standard for about 89 or 90% heat recovery. But actually, German standards oftentimes has their own flaws, and Italians love to point it out. I may know one guy that likes to point it out. And once you start looking at third-party data for how these units actually perform, you cannot really expect 90% heat recovery. It is more about this data. If you have questions, reach out to me. We have all of this data from third-party testing in Europe. But it's actually a lot less than what the German label value is. So something to keep in mind that a lot of the European products may sound awesome, but there are some flaws in the way things are tested overseas as well. What about indoor air quality? Um, we have the case of mold. I talked about the CO2 level, and with a centralized unit like Enrico installed, that needs to be calibrated because because you need to make sure that each room has a design ventilation rate for the supply or extraction, and that needs to be met in the field. So you need to go around and measure the airflow that comes out of that ERV and then measure it. This is a study made in Colorado a few years ago, and what they found is that the passive house that was actually certified, the indoor air quality was pretty good. The passive house but not certified homes that they tested, the air quality was all over the place. Some of them was good, some of them was very bad, and the ones that were very bad, they had bought the ERV, they had paid the consultant to do the job, but nobody had commissioned the ventilation system, and so they had paid the premium, but nobody had commissioned the system, and so they were not actually getting the air quality that they had paid for. So something to keep in mind, because these are technologies that are not that complicated, but a lot of installers locally don't have much experience with that. So something that, again, you may pay the premium, you may not get the quality that you paid for. So this is the one passive house that was certified. The indoor air quality was very good. And then these are the passive house like buildings where about half of them had good indoor air quality and the other half had very bad indoor air quality because the system was not commissioned. The fresh air ventilation system, the ERV, was not commissioned. So some rooms did not receive any air, some rooms received too much air. So the air quality was not great. So performance that ages, keep in mind that, as I said earlier, a family will stay in the house in average for 13 years before they move out. Again, this is a piece of information that comes from the National Association of Home Builders, does not come from PHI or FIUS, comes from the National Association of Home Builders that don't typically want to push for improvement or change in the quality of buildings. They just do a market analysis. So looking at losses in gas in the glass units, we said how Enrico chose to have argon-filled glass units to have the better performance, as opposed to Enrique. Enrique chose to have the air-filled glass units because he heard on the internet that argon gas escapes after just a few years, so why bother? And the column chart here shows on the left-hand side, the skinny tube of pane that Enrique has stays pretty much the same over time at about 4.77 center of glass R value, as opposed to Enrico on the right-hand side, starts from a center of glass R value of 9.8, and over time, their glass units do lose a little bit of gas. It is standard for the argon to escape about 1% per year, starting at 90% when the glass unit is brand new. And so after 13 years, 90% minus 13% is about 77%. So that glass unit with 77% argon and the rest being air goes down from a center of glass R value of 9.8 down to 9.4. So it does go down a little bit, but if those are good, well-built glass units, you can expect a very similar performance even after 13 years. And it's still greatly outperforms the air-filled glass unit that Enrique had. So yes, there is a little bit of performance loss, but it is very negligible compared to the additional performance you get by filling your glass units with gas. Similar would be also with Krypton. We just didn't cover Krypton in this slide. Looking at day 2 and the aging of the air barrier, Enrique had chosen the aero barrier, so the nebulized caulking agent sprayed in the building to get down to 0.6 air changes per hour. And keep in mind that Enrique planned on the drywall at the walls and as well as the ceiling to be the primary air barrier. So that is, we're going to see how that ages. So Enrico hit 0.6. Enrique hit 0.6, but once you start removing all the masking that is necessary for the aero barrier operation to be executed, he jumps up from 0.6 to 0.35. This is something that we have seen consistently in a couple of projects where we had aero barrier done. And in those projects, aero barrier did the job because the project had to go down below 0.6 and they could no longer get down to 0.6. But we saw numbers climb. Aero barrier had a certificate saying, oh, it's 0.13 ACH50, but actually once you removed all of the masking that they used to protect windows and all the other stuff, it went back up from 0.13 to 0.49. So significant jump back up in the air leakage, just because aero barrier does not go over windows, it cannot go over HVAC equipment, so there's leaks there too. Then, then looking at 13 years past, people live in the house, start poking holes through the drywall. So how does that perform compared to the original point 0.6? So Enrico had the air barrier, the slab, being the vapor barrier, taped with all seams and penetrations, had the sheeting of the wall as the air barrier, and had the um, smart vapor retardant at the ceiling. And over time, we can expect that to become a little bit more leaky. So there are a couple of pages about this from PHI and Profsky, as well as EMU's own projects. And we can expect that zero point 0.6 over 13 years to go up to 0.66, 0.65-ish, unless there's some failure. So, say if a door breaks or things like that, they can be a failure. But if there's no failures, that is kind of the range of increase that we can expect, as opposed to Enrique had chosen to use drywall at the walls and at the ceiling to be the air barrier, and it's a lot more exposed to cracking just naturally with the building settling, as well as the users poking holes through it. And so the increase in air leakage can be expected to be much higher. Specifically, it's about five times higher because drywall is a lot more exposed. And yeah, over 13 years, a building that depends on drywall as the air barrier can be expected to be the air leaks to increase 4 times faster compared to a building where the air barrier is protected, as in the case we have here with Enrico's project. Aging efficiency. So after 13 years, we can expect a 2% excuse me 2% increase in heating and cooling for Enrico's project, just because of the project aging, the air leakage being a little bit higher, the loss of the gas at the glass unit being a little bit higher. But 2% over 13 years is very little in terms of increase, as opposed to Enrique's aging performance, as well as the initial performance gap, can be almost twice as much the energy consumption that their client were expecting. So to conclude, the closer we get to zero energy consumption in buildings, the more every detail matters. Whatever the project goals, performance-based energy analysis allows to optimize resources and make informed decision. Whichever decision you may make, if you have the data, then you can be informed and use that handrail to make your own decisions. Then in high performance buildings, prescriptive approaches end up being more expensive and wasteful compared to performance-based approach. When I have a QR code at the end of this presentation to show just that. And then the science of passive house provides methods to prevent mold and condensation, deliver thermal comfort and indoor air quality, then the regular building codes is decades away from adopting and enforcing. And lastly, pushing building performance is an effective way to future-proof projects for the time when EVs are going to be more widely adopted. Thank you for watching this. As always, I appreciate you watching me geeking out about construction and building science. If you want to learn more about passive house and our training opportunities, this is a QR code that you can use to get to know us and what training opportunities we offer, as well as we have a free info session every first Thursday of the month. If you have projects, if you have questions about training or building science, please bring them along and we can go over them together.